special meeting, would I ask for a motion from the floor to suspend reading the minutes from last meeting and any reports from the board members? We have a motion from the floor. Anybody? Louis Cruz. Seconded. Tom Cruz. We got a second. Anybody? All right, Fisher. Okay. We're going to get right to our guest speaker, because I'd like to get him home to watch the debates. It's going to be at 9 o'clock. It's probably going to be a horror.
Probably going to stand here.
I know our guest speaker for over 20 years, well before he became a politician. He was a community leader, an activist, and became and he belonged to a number of civic groups in the community. He was well liked. I'll tell you a fair story. One time I went to a dry cleaners in Willits Point, because his community is where Willits Point. It's Whitestone, Bayside, Little Neck, Douglaston. And the guy had a dry cleaning store, and he opened up his dry cleaning store, and he seen Tony on the side of his, he had it on a corner, it was a corner dry cleaning store, and he seen Tony cleaning graffiti that was put on by the kids overnight. That's what kind of, alone, by himself, just cleaning the wall by himself. That's what kind of guy he is. He is well liked in his community. Before he became the city council, we ran for city council, and he won handily, which is, well, because he's well liked, like I related. What happened was that he's known as a bit of a maverick. Whoa. Am I right? Yeah. That he goes against the grain. He goes against the grain, and he'll talk to about it. He'll go against the grain. He irritates a lot of people, and he's beneficial to much more. That's the way they like him. That was city council, and he was in a city council. He goes against the grain. He goes against his own party. He ran for senator. He ran against Frank Hatterman, who was a senator for 38 years. Am I right, Tony? In that area, in Queens, Bayside, Douglaston, was it Belrose too was included? Belrose? Glen Village and Douglaston. That's how much he's well liked. Like I said, he goes against the grain, he irritates a lot of people, but he also, a lot of people like him. Regarding the current scandal in the city today, it's with Speaker of the Assembly, Sheldon Silver. I think he's involved in a committee to investigate him. A member of the same party. Just to show you what kind of gnomes, as we say in Italian, he has. All right, so without further ado, another thing. I emailed a number of you a video that you're not going to see on TV. It's of the Muslim Day Parade, September 23rd, in which he was invited along with a lot of other politicians. And what he did was stay nice and quiet, and was in the parade. At the end, they were on the stage, and they all made speeches, and he was going to make a speech himself. But before him, they had these, lack of a better word, jihadists. These horrible people get up, talk about this country, how bad this country was, and how the United Nations should sanction this country. In the middle of the speech, and it's on tape, and a lot of you got it because I sent it to you, he walked off the stage. The reporters and the photographers, they came after him, they wanted to know why, and he says, no, he said, I'm not going to spoil it for them, I'm just highly offended. And maybe he'll discuss that. So without further ado, I give you the Honorable Tony Avella, Senator Tony Avella.
Thank you, Ed, for that introduction. The one thing I would correct, when you said I irritate a lot of people, I irritate a lot of the politicians, not the people I do consider,
Yeah.
I do consider myself an independent elected official because I do what I think is right and what's best for you, and that does, on occasion, annoy some of my fellow colleagues in government. Now, you know, Ed just sort of mentioned about Sheldon Silver. I was one of the few politicians in my own party that came out and basically said that he should step down as Speaker of the Assembly because of this incident with the sexual harassment case. Shelley has had a great career in state government, no question about it. But he's part of the old school. And if we're ever going to reform what happens in Albany, some of these individuals, it's time for them to step down. As I mentioned, I beat Frank Padovan, who had been in office for 38 years. Even the most well-intentioned person, after a certain amount of time in public office, start to get a little jaded, start to get a little tired. And Albany needs to change, because Albany is all about themselves, the politicians, and not necessarily about what you need for your families and your careers and your jobs and your quality of life. Let me talk about a couple of things, but obviously I'll talk about the Muslim parade. There were a number of mosques in my Senate district that I had been invited to speak and talk, and every time I would go there, it would be about the same issues that you and I are concerned about. They invited me to go to the parade. I marched in the parade. They were very cordial to me. And then I was waiting on the stage to speak. They had a number of speakers, dignitaries, and then an imam, who's the equivalent of a priest or a rabbi, got up from Brooklyn. And he started yelling and screaming. And some of the things, you couldn't even hear what he was saying because we were behind the microphones. But one of the things he got up and said, the problem with this country is freedom of speech and freedom of rights. And one of the reporters was in the audience and could see the smoke coming out of my ears then. So he sat down, and then this woman got up and went into the most awful attack on this country that you would believe. And also on the state of Israel. It was anti-Semitic. It was unbelievable. I mean, at some point she said something about that we were killing the unborn babies in the Palestine women. She could have said Zionist Nazis. It was really horrendous. And to a point where I couldn't sit there. I had to get up and storm off the stage. And when I got off the stage, I said to the organizers, I was really offended by this. You should be ashamed, because if this is the message, this is the opposite of the message you're trying to show, that you're Americans and you believe and want the same things that everybody else does. And then the very next day I sent a letter to the organization saying exactly how I felt. I'm pleased that I did get an apology from the organization, but we'll have to see if they really mean that in the future. So I have to tell you, the video that he sent around,
which you don't see on regular TV.
Right, right.
I wonder why. The liberal press.
One of the persons in my office has taken out a map of the United States and, you know, just colors in the phone calls I have gotten about this, thanking me for doing what I did. It's almost every state in the country and countries outside of the United States. And as of today, 115,000 people have looked at that video. 115,000 people.
I hope you have a remote starter for your car.
You know, somebody did say, do you have bodyguards now? I hope it doesn't come to that. But let me talk about two other issues that are that I'm working on right now. And then, I don't know if you want me to take some questions. Sure. And going back to the Sheldon Silver incident and all the corruption that's going on in Albany. This is the end of my first term in the Senate. And last year, the governor and the state legislature, we passed legislation to create the Joint Commission on Public Integrity, JCO. We thought it was a good step forward, but obviously, it failed its first test, because its first test was to investigate Sheldon Silver in the payoff $103,000 that was made to two women to cover up a sexual harassment case by Vito Lopez. So I've introduced legislation to change the entire process, because right now J-Code is controlled by the legislature. And I think it's clear the legislature cannot investigate itself. So I've introduced the bill just within the past few days to change the operation of this commission, have the governor appoint independent people to the commission that are only recommended by other independent people outside of government and have nothing to do with the legislature. I think that's the only way we're going to start to get to the real corruption that's going on in the legislature. And I don't care what party you're in, I mean, both parties are at fault. The other piece of legislation I want to talk about is something that most people don't realize is going to have a serious impact on a lot of our nonprofit organizations, not only in our own neighborhoods here, but throughout the entire state. For the third year in a row, all discretionary funds for state senators and state assembly members has been eliminated. Now the Governor Patterson and now Governor Cuomo did it because of the corruption, where some legislators were putting the money indirectly into their pocket. And while we need to eliminate that, the problem is this discretionary funds funded the senior centers, funded the veterans groups, funded the Little League organizations, funded the cultural organizations. I know of 2 senior centers, 2 cultural organizations that are going to close their doors because they're out of money. They don't get money from the budget. They've always relied on, whether it be city council people or the state legislatures, to keep them open. One senior center, which also runs a youth program in Whitestone, has done it for 26 years. It is now bankrupt because we don't have these funds anymore. So to try and get around the governor's opposition, I introduced a bill to create a new lottery scratch-off game, where the money would go directly to a community grant fund to fund these organizations. This way, it's not out of the budget, the elected officials aren't involved in it, and if this gets authorized, the county or the borough where you buy the ticket, the money stays in that county or borough. So I'm trying to get the legislature and the governor involved in this, because if we don't do something soon, these organizations are going to disappear. And for seniors, the senior center that they go to every day, this is their quality of life. This helps their health. The Little Leagues, the kids' sports organizations, if they don't close, they're just going to have to charge more money to people who can't afford it. The veterans organizations, the Vietnam veterans of Queens, is going to be in trouble. They've already told me the programs that they have for Vietnam vets, they're going to have to shut down some of these programs. I can't tell you how serious an issue this is. And unfortunately, it's not out in the public. We'll hear about it when all these organizations starts closing. But I want to try and do something before that happens. So if you're interested in supporting it, please send a letter to the governor saying support the idea. I don't care whether he takes credit for the idea. I don't care whether he brings back discretionary funds. Let's just do something to keep these worthwhile organizations going. Because if the state had to do it, it would cost 10 times as much money. Because most of these organizations are volunteers. And the money that we give them goes directly to programs and to the people they serve. So I can't overemphasize how important this is. So those are 2 things that I've worked on in just the last couple of weeks. We're probably going to go back to Albany after the election. We have to do some outstanding work. There is one bill that we didn't do, that is the tax abatement for co-ops and condos, which we do every year, to try and equalize the higher tax rate that co-ops and condos pay rather than 1 and 2, 3 family homes. So we didn't do that because there wasn't a deal when session ended in June. So we have to go back. If you don't go back, that means every co-op and condo owner in the state of New York is going to pay much higher taxes, much higher taxes. What? What was that?
Have a condo in Bayside.
Don't pass
He's not doing it just for me.
Don't worry about it. He's going to make a lot of money from the scratch-offs just for me, and so it'll work out. I'll be funded more.
It's rolling, see that?
Thank you, I got it.
What'd you say?
With that, that's some of the things that I'm working on. I'd be happy to take, a couple of questions on any subject. Don't all jump up at once.
How about term limits for legislators?
Yeah, that's a good thing.
The reason I say that is, I supported Padavan for the amount of time that I was living in Belrose here, until we heard about the Creedmoor deal with the
What the Nycrtpoa, right.
the organization that was going to build 2 9-story buildings, actually it's going to be 2-story buildings, and then all of a sudden it's 9-story. But you know that they get entrenched, as Padavan and others are. Why not term limits?
I agree. I actually introduced, you'd almost think this was a setup question. I actually introduced the bill in the Senate to establish term limits for the first time for assembly members and state senators. I agree with you. And again, it goes back to my earlier point. When they're in there too long, they start to get jaded, they start to forget the reason that they were there. And let me just talk about that, for those of you who don't know what he was talking about. Creedmoor, the entire Creedmoor property is in my Senate district as it stands today. When I got elected, the first thing I did was reach out to the state to get an idea of what was going on in Creedmoor. Because I had heard a lot of rumors as the state was selling property to this group, to that group. And when I was campaigning, going to door, I heard that there was this South Asian Indian group that had gotten property through Padavan to build a 1-story freestanding community center. And it was very interesting because the people who brought it up to me were other members of the Indian community saying, well, if this is for the Indian community, why weren't we involved? So it seemed to be a very small section. And it turns out to be a Christian organization within the Indian community. No sooner do I get elected, the group comes to my office. And it's the, I forget, what does the ICCC stand for? The Indian Cultural and Community Center. They came to my office, and they had already bought this piece of property in Albany, and they wanted to buy another piece of property to extend what they already had. And I told them, well, let me see, I want to see what's going on in Creedmoor before I make any decision on what I'm going to do. No sooner than they left that office, all of a sudden I'm starting to get phone calls from other elected officials. Oh, you got to do this. It's a good group. You got to introduce the bill to sell them the property. And I said, well, what's the rush? No, you got to do this. You got to do this. And I said, well, wait a second. What's the, why is there a full court press here to get this done? And why do I have to do it so quickly? Well, they're a good group. They want to do this, and this whole runaround. So I said, well, I'm not going to do it until I really take a whole look at this situation. I start to find out from the state, there is no master plan for Creedmoor. Nobody knows what the heck is going on the entire property. Nobody even knew what the responsibilities of the individual groups were that occupied buildings on Creedmoor. It was an unbelievable situation. So then, meanwhile, this group is starting to really pressure me. And then they have people calling me, oh, you're anti-Indian, why aren't you allowing this to go ahead? So I said to the group, well, you know what, let's do it on site. Show me the piece of property you want to buy. So we go out there, and they want to purchase the piece of property that has, if you know Creedmoor, the power plant on it with the smokestacks. And I said to them, what are you, crazy? Why do you want this? Because once you buy this, you're going to be responsible for the remediation. It's got to be like $30, $40 million. How could you possibly afford this? Oh, no, we're not worried about this. I left that meeting and said to myself, something isn't right here. Something isn't right, because how could they possibly do this?
Got to make the bombs.
So I start to investigate this, and the press calls me, the Post, and I start to talk to the Post about this. The Post does its own investigation. Finds out that the group, thanks to Frank Padavan, thanks to then Assemblyman Mark Wepper, who introduced the bill in the Assembly, to Padavan's bill in the Senate, they bought the piece of property for $1 million when it was worth $7 million. So right off the bat, how does a group get state property for $1 million when it's worth $7 million? Then while all this is starting to go on, we find out it's not a 1-story freestanding community center. It is 2 9-story buildings. Supposedly with apartments for seniors. Well, Then I find out, because people came up to me from the Indian community on the street at one of my mobile offices and said, you know, we'd like to know what's going on with this because we invested. I said, no, you donated to the church. No, we invested. They invested $40,000 each with the idea they were going to get an apartment. Now, this is, now you're getting into a whole nother range of investigation, because now it's like a private development. So, almost at the same time, I asked for 2 investigations, and the Attorney General's office and the Inspector General's office are now investigating the whole situation. I hope sooner than later they'll come to a conclusion. I refused, despite the pressure, not only from Mark Wepper, but David Wepper and Barbara Clark, who actually threatened me on this, to introduce the second bill to sell them the second piece of property. Because even after they knew everything was going on, they still were going to go ahead with the legislation. And the Assembly passed the bill. Now, there's no Senate bill, so they can't do anything. But even after all of this came out, the Assembly still passed the bill. Now, the investigation is still going on. The group is still pursuing building these things. And now we find out it's not only the 2 9-story buildings, it's a medical center as well. It is an absolutely unbelievable situation. And the very fact that they were allowed to do this, and I understand people knew that this was their proposal from the very beginning. You want to talk about corruption? I don't know if it's criminal, and that's what the 2 investigations will determine. But as far as I'm concerned, a lot of unethical things happen with the elected officials who in effect were trading this property for votes and donations, because they all got donations from this group. This is the type of activity that absolutely has to stop in Albany, because it's your money, and in effect, it's your property, it's state property. And if the state is going to sell it, it should be sold for proper value so that the taxpayers of the state get the proper value, because that goes to our police, it goes to firefighters, it goes to education, it goes to all of that. So I'm glad you brought that up, because that to me is a real disgrace. And it just goes to show what goes on. But I am pursuing the term limit legislation. I don't have too many sponsors in all of it, but I got to tell you. What I'm trying to do is get the good government groups to support it.
Can a citizen bring a referendum for the state to have it?
Yes, but good luck. Because the same restrictions that somebody running for office to get on the ballot has to go through, an independent referendum has to go through. And I remember, to give you one example, I remember a number of years ago where the UFT went around with a state referendum to mandate lower class size. And they got hundreds of thousands of signatures. The state went to court, the people who didn't want it on the ballot, and threw off signature after signature. At the end of the day, they had less than what they needed. If you want to do it, I'll support you, but at the end of the day, it's going to be very tough to survive those legal challenges. New York State is one of the few states in the country that has such archaic laws in terms of ballot access, whether it's for candidates or for independent referendums. It's very tough. If I can get the good government groups to really get something started, and the media to get behind it, I think we can do something. But it's going to be an effort. It really is going to be an effort. I mean, look at the fact that that was one of the first bills that I introduced when I took office last year. You don't read about it in paper, even though I keep bringing it up, and people bring it up to me in meetings like this, but I can't get, like the TV or the daily media, you know, the daily newspapers to really bring it up as an issue. Why aren't the editorial boards doing something about this? Anybody else? I know that was an awfully long-winded answer there.
Why do they have to have an investigation on Shelley when he stepped on his crane in the past and he's continuing to do it again?
That's a bold statement.
Because he ain't stepping down by himself.
But why investigate him? The proof is already there. He did it with his aide with the sex abuse case, what, 5 years ago?
Yeah,
Yeah. The women also?
Yes, it's the same thing.
It's history.
I agree with you. I just think it's unbelievable that this goes on, And there's no ramifications for this stuff. It's almost like you have to do it in front of a TV camera for something to finally happen. And that's why, you know, to clean up Albany, we have to do a lot of things. Term limits is one of them. Campaign finance reform is another. We have to do so many measures across the board to clean up how it operates. So people like this can't get away with this continually. I mean, how many elected officials are in jail? Are absolutely in jail now.
Not enough.
And by the way, when you introduced me as a politician, I consider that an insult.
No offense intended.
Anybody else? Nobody? Listen.
Hold on.
Oh, I almost got away. Look at that.
He couldn't get away. All right, I got two pet peeves. All right, being a police officer for a few years, like everyone else here, we served the city, I served the state. Also being a veteran. I get these phone calls at home for these organizations that they're going to help the police officers, they're going to help the vet. I mean, now we're all on fixed incomes, you know, retired. Here, you get to the point where I don't give to any organization anymore because I know that the New York State Police Benevolent Association gives not a nickel. But I think that there has to be some criminal penalties for these non-profit organizations that go out there waving the flag, and it's very hard. And they tell you, we can send you this little card that gets you out of a ticket. Ain't gonna get you out of anything. Probably get you two. All right? But I think that there has to be some legislation. I mean, if you spend the time...
Well, the Attorney General is responsible for looking into nonprofits when they don't properly contribute based upon their mission statement. And he's actually, Schneiderman has actually done a few investigations recently on that. But there's also an annual report by which these nonprofits have to make every year, which shows how much actually goes to the people they're supposed to be serving. I mean, you'd be surprised how many organizations, if they raise $1, maybe only 10 cents actually goes to the group. But there's no law against how much. But if they don't, there's some, I can't tell you what the actual law reads because I don't remember, but there is some criteria by which if they don't follow their mission statement, it's a violation of the law. If you have somebody with a specific group, let me know. And I'll ask the Attorney General to do an investigation. And a lot of them don't even file this annual statement. That's a violation of the law. What was the second pet peeve?
Well, it was the vets. I mean, I think that's despicable. You have these guys running around, they're General so-and-so, and they need your help for all these disabled vets. And I'm building there 9 floors.
There are certainly a lot of scams each and every day. And unfortunately, people give to them.
We have the do not call registry.
Yes.
I'm on the
Right.
do not call, but they still call. They want charity donations or whatever.
I think non-profits are allowed to call you, churches.
And politicians.
And, right, that politician.
You know, somebody called, well, I'll check into the nonprofits, I'm not sure about that. I know the politicians are exempt, but somebody called me about this the other day, and I actually looked into the law. There was a previous bill introduced in the Senate to include political phone calls in the prohibition. The person did reintroduce the bill, but I'm going to reintroduce it. Listen, if you don't want to have the phone call, it's up to you. Yeah? I know some of those robocalls go on and on and on and forever during election time. You don't want to hear from us, that's up to you. I'm fine with that. All right? Oh.
You know anything about the variable supplement?
The variable supplement, I know a lot about it, yes.
Is there any movement?
Well, the mayor has been trying to get rid of it.
Yeah.
There's a lot of money involved in it.
Right. I opposed his efforts. I still oppose his efforts. I don't think there's any movement to get, to do away with it. I haven't heard anything further. I mean, the mayor keeps getting up and screaming about it.
They've been getting away with it for the last 15 years.
What do you mean getting away with it?
I think you gotta explain what you're talking about.
Oh, you don't care. Oh, that's right, I've been working on that, that's right, you worked on that. I've actually written some letters on that. I thought you were talking about the fact that the mayor wants to get rid of it for everybody who has it.
Christmas bonus.
Well, there's a lot of us that don't get it because of Rudy.
I am working on that. I am working on it. It's the type of thing, though, you have a governor right now who is looking to cut pension benefits. So it's very tough to get any additions to what already exists. But I am working on it.
Do you know how many people are involved? How many people have been cut off from it? Oh, you do know?
Oh, I do know. Yeah, I do know. I'm trying as hard as I can.
Hey, Russo probably got his ear on it all the time.
Yeah, no. He reminds me.
Oh, they're waiting till everybody dies?
Basically.
Probably. Probably. I'm giving you an honest answer. You know, it's... What did I say about how Albany operates? You got too many people in office. They don't care about you. They get into office, and the first thing they care about is themselves. It really is a shame, and that's why I irritate a lot of my colleagues when I say things like this. Anybody else? Have you had enough of me? Listen, thanks for inviting me. Enjoy the evening, and thank you for your previous service.
Constituents and people. He goes against his own party because of what they think is right. And he'll fight. Stand by.
Stand by.
I'm getting that. It might be Apple. No, it's not Apple.
You see the box.
We're going to see nobody else.
Representative, this is going to be on display, by the way, up front here on the plastic display. Presented to the Honorable Tony Avella, New York State Senator.
Why do elected officials always get called honorable? Explain that to me.
Less than honorable. Change it.